Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Friday morning, January 17th, 2025 at 9 a.m. and we are continuing our exploration of the Budget Adjustment Act. We have this morning we'll welcome the Agency of Natural Resources, then we're going to take a break and the Department of Public Service will come in. And then we have Douglas Farm coming back to talk about ERAF, Emergency Rental Assistance, and a flood update. And then after lunch, we have the Cannabis Control Board. Some things in this may change, and that's how we go. But at least we start with Agency of Natural Resources and Secretary Moore and Steve Gomez. So if you want to come and take a seat at the table, we'd love to have you.
Thank you for having us. We're just trying to join the meeting so we can share. One of us can share the presentation.
That's great. And so we have a lot of new members here, so we'll go around and introduce ourselves so you can meet everybody.
Thank you.
That'd be great.
Good morning, Dave Iacoboni. I live in Morrisville and I represent the Lamoille, Washington district.
Nice to see you.
Good to see
Good
you.
morning and welcome. John Kosensky. I live in Burke and represent the Essex Caledonia district.
I, Mike Nigro, represent Bennington and Pownell.
Tom Stevens from Waterbury, representing Washington Chittenden District.
Morning, Jim Harrison, represent Chittenden, Mendon, Killington, and Pittsfield.
Robin Schley from Middlebury.
Tip Lilly from Burlington.
Trevor Squirrel, Jericho and Underhill.
Wayne LaRush, Franklin 5, Highgate, Franklin, Richford, and Berkshire.
Morning, Mike Merwicki from the Wyndham 4 district of Putney and Dummerston.
Hi, Lynn Dickinson. I represent St. Albans Town, the famous bay.
And Trevor is continuing to be your key. So anything A&R, Trevor is the guy that committee we ask questions of. So
That's great. And so I'm Julie Moore. I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources, starting my ninth year in this position. And am joined by Steve Gomez, who's our Chief Financial Officer. And then also on the screen is Jason Batchelder, who's our DEC Commissioner. Given the relatively modest nature of our budget adjustment requests, we figured Steve and I could handle it and not have a giant parade of folks join us this morning.
thanks.
So I think, no. Let's see if I think I'm about to join the meeting. Steve can't join the meeting, so apologies for slight delay. I'm not going to have the computer on. And do I have the ability to share screen?
Yes, you should.
Okay. My apologies.
Everybody has a copy of.
Okay, well then, we may be able to just jump right in while my computer opens up the file. So we have just, I guess it's really 3 requests, but sort of in 2 different places within the agency as part of our budget adjustment this year. The first is related to some unanticipated costs around wildland fires that were incurred by the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation over the summer. As you may be aware, there was a significant drought in central Vermont or southern Vermont, which is in some ways for folks from the northern half of the state, a little hard to wrap your mind around given the amount of rain northern parts of Vermont saw this summer. But it was real, and we saw some very significant wildland fire risk as a result, and a number of actual blazes erupt. The agency has 3 wildland firefighters on staff. Getting close now. Has 3 wildland firefighters on staff, and a lot of what we do is actually to provide support to municipalities when they are called out to wildland fires. This year, we had, I believe there were 9 instances where we were called out to provide that kind of support. The most significant of the fires was in Barton, where we saw about 75 acres burned. But overall, there were 96 fires that impacted 179 acres in Vermont. At the bottom there, we note there are 22 FPR employees that hold red cards. That's the wildland firefighting certification. Oftentimes we support either other states or neighboring provinces through compact arrangements. And so those staff can be called out to provide support. Similarly, at times we call out for support, and indeed New Hampshire, I believe, assisted us with the Barton fire earlier this year. So we ended up with $33,200 in unanticipated payroll costs associated with staff being called out to fight these fires, as well as are requesting $1,500 for town reimbursement.
And so that wasn't something that could be absorbed into your budget.
No, our budgets are very tight.
Representative Rush.
So you don't have a line item, a base line item. Fires occur pretty much every year. I know you can't anticipate how much they're gonna be, but you don't start out with any kind of a base in your budget to cover the recurring fires that you know will happen each year.
Not beyond the staff costs for those 3 positions. So when it requires significant overtime, which is really a lot of what's reflected here, as well as some mutual aid, we don't have a placeholder for that in our budget.
Representative.
Just real quick, just to go back, 22 employees that hold red cards, is that just a level of training for them?
Correct. It means they're certified wildland
Okay.
firefighters. The second increase that we are bringing to you or request through the BAA is as a result of changing in testing fees at the Vermont Agriculture and Environmental Laboratory down in Randolph. The Vail Lab is managed by the Agency of Agriculture, but we are probably the biggest consumer of their lab services. They published an updated schedule of rates effective January 1st. And it has impacts for 2 different parts of the department's work that's done at the lab, work by our air and waste management program, and then some of our water sampling. The water sampling number is quite low. The reason for that is we are billed on a quarterly basis by the Vail Lab and don't do a lot of water monitoring over the winter. And so really the change in fees will be more pronounced in the FY26 budget. And we'll be back to talk about that more when the budget drops.
So these are anticipated cost increases because if the rates went up
January 1st.
January 1st, you haven't incurred those expenses, but this is what you are anticipating for the second half of the year. So you're saying that Agency of Ag raised its fees? Right.
And
how much?
well, essentially they raised them to reflect market rates, I would offer. We worked with them to compare the costs for some samples that we take to the Endyne private laboratory in Williston, and they have matched or beat the prices available to us on the private market. And there are certain tests only they can run, but the costs for reagents and other components have gone up over time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for this. Do you have, I'm gathering you don't have any additional ADS, is it
SLA?
SLA? I was thinking SLR, but that's
SLA, right.
a whole different thing. Yeah, SLA charges.
Defer to Steve on that.
Yeah, we do have some increased costs as we're looking to absorb those within our existing budgets, though. So we have had some opportunity to absorb some costs. So we've done that where we can. And then other costs like these, we're not able to absorb any longer. So yes, there is an increased cost, but we're looking to absorb it in our existing budget.
Any other questions about this?
Yeah, so
Sorry on the ADS stuff, because we've seen it in almost in many different
departments. Is it a question of the strings that might be attached to the funding that you need to like ask for this particular funding in the budget adjustment rather than paying from existing funds? Like you're doing with the SLA stuff?
Not exactly. I think it's where we had ability to absorb some of the pressures and frankly, the point in time when those pressures were sort of recognized in our budget. We have some organic growth in special funds. We have very limited growth in some of our federal funds, but try to take full advantage of those dollars. And so to the extent we were able to anticipate some of the upward pressures in things like SLA from ADS, we sort of used what we had first to address those needs, and we're left with these two remaining unanticipated gaps.
Rep. Dickinson?
Yeah, thank you. In this budget, attachment B, you have $28,000, again, environmental lab services. This is under operating expenses. Is that different from the 8,000 below that, or how does that work?
Just two different appropriations. One is related to air monitoring we do, and the other is related to water monitoring we do.
And they're all related to raising fees.
At the changes in prices of the.
Okay, so when you say they're trying to reach market prices, they're as high as the private labs, or they're just a little below?
They are no higher than
No
private.
higher. So they were much lower and they raised them up to make the
Correct.
market.
Correct. I, to my knowledge, hadn't changed prices in the 8 years I've been in this job.
Since it was public built.
Correct.
Yeah, so. Does anybody use it other than the government, the state?
Yes, in that we have what we call the La Rosa Partnership Program that you may be familiar with, where we give out what are essentially, we think of as scholarships to our lab. So different watershed organizations would apply to us with a monitoring project. And we we get way more requests than we have capacity to take on. So they are bringing samples to the lab. And occasionally there are projects being done by partners with state funding where they've sort of built into their budget using the lab as their lab of record for me.
Okay, so if you're doing it for nonprofits like watershed associations, do you charge them, or is that scholarship supposed to be their
Correct. The
cost?
scholarship covers the cost.
So we pay the scholarship to them and then they use the lab, which
Correct.
obviously is a good thing, but.
It
yeah.
is, and it sort of had its genesis in recognizing we had underutilized. So in the private sector, you're paying on a per sample basis.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is we're paying for a set of chemists.
Anyway.
Who do this work. And so to the extent they were underutilized, that's what the La Rosa Partnership had its genesis in, was trying to make full use of the chemists we have on staff at the lab. So that's why we have to manage that capacity, right? There have been instances where we've been asked, well, couldn't you do more? Well, we'd have to hire another chemist, right? We were trying to use this in sort of maximizing the work we could do with the staff we have. So it's tricky, right? This is sort of a private market service being offered by a state agency. And so it doesn't fit exactly, but the per sample costs we're charged that then get remitted to the ag agency now much more closely reflect the costs we
So
would
that's
offer.
the scholarship for these nonprofits who are doing their own work.
Correct. I mean, it could be called a grant, but we've always referred to it as a scholarship.
Do you put that under grants in your budget? Not here, for instance, but
I would assume so, but I don't have that level of detail on.
you have to pay it out. You pay it out to ag.
We do pay it out to ag.
So it should be in there somewhere.
Yes, that interdepartmental transfer would be in there. I don't think we actually ever give the money to the watershed group. We just give them a commitment to do the analysis and then we pay the ag
And then
agency.
interdepartmental. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And Rep. Lewis had a question.
Just for perspective, could you give us an idea what the total amount of expenditures would be for those two areas, those two funds? How much you spend
Annually?
annually? Roughly, does it, just.
I think we can get back to you, but I believe it's on the order of $500,000.
It's like our current, I believe the current amount is around $500,000, yeah.
For B 710 and each for N 711?
The airline is actually far less expensive. I think it's less than $100,000 total. The vast majority of the samples we have analyzed at the lab are water quality samples. But as I say, it doesn't show here because of the timing of the year. It will be a significant increase that will be shown in our FY26 budget.
Because you're doing more samples or just that's,
Just because the cost has gone up.
yes.
I'm just struck. I think you've got a $301 million budget, is that right?
297 million, I think, in FY20, but yes.
We're asking
million
for
already.
$70,000, which is and we're focusing on these tiny little numbers, right? And I guess I want to step back and I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about your vacancy rate currently? Or any other needs that didn't make it into the BAA that we would be anticipating in an FY26 ask or?
I think the most significant ask in FY26 is probably around the lab and lab costs. Our vacancy rate isn't a reflection of anything other than the current sort of labor market. We do our best to refill positions as soon as they become vacant. I know Commissioner Batchelder had shared when we did an introduction in House Energy earlier this week, his current vacancy rate, I think, is about 11%. But that's normal, frankly, right now, given the amount of churn we're seeing in the labor market. The numbers are somewhat lower in Fish and Wildlife and FPR, but that's a historic trend as well. We do have a really large budget right now, and it includes very significant federal funds. When I started in this job and worked on the FY18 budget, ANR's total budget was 125 million. So the fact that we're at, excuse me, 330 million now is really significant growth. There's been some growth on the state side, which is largely the Clean Water Fund, which reflects between $40 and $60 million a year in our budget, depending on the year. But the balance of that increase is largely passed through federal funds. The lion's share of that is passing through DEC as a result of ARPA investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law. There are smaller sums being passed through FPR, largely around land conservation and the Forest Legacy Program and some opportunities that have been made available to us there. But it has been a dramatic period of growth for the agency, coupled with some really significant policy initiatives pushed forward by this body, we are challenged to fulfill all of our current obligations.
Sounds good.
Are there some position vacancies you just have not been able to hire someone for, the long-term openings? There's the usual cycle, I realize.
Correct.
Coming and going, retirements and those kinds of things, but.
In terms of like particularized expertise that's challenging to come by.
Areas, yeah.
I would say engineers is been broadly, we've been looking to hire within our dam safety program and our river management program. And hiring engineers into state government is hard, and in that we really struggle to match the salaries they can receive in the private sector. So that's been one. The other place that we've been really challenged is in our business offices. Steve can probably speak to that in more detail, but it's just, again, a lot of people who go into finance and accounting have a skill set that's in really high demand and may not have the same interest in working in the environmental sciences, whereas we're able to, in some ways, because we're a mission organization, pull in scientists and technical experts who are passionate about the work finance people tend to be passionate about the numbers and can do that in a lot of different locales. And so I think we've had a really hard time in the business offices. I don't know if you'd add anything there.
Yeah, just as an example, like in the Department of Forest, Parks and Rec, I think in the last year and a half or 2 years, like their grants office has done a complete turnover, right? So that's everybody left and brought onboarded all new people. So that's just like one example that's happening in the business offices.
So just one follow-up. So with engineering position challenges, trying to find folks that want to come here.
Yeah.
Is that changing anything about what you're trying to do as a result of not having such openings for maybe a longer period than you would hope for?
Yeah, I think it just frankly slows our progress in some ways. We have been able to hire into range for a couple of key positions, so offering a salary that's more competitive. But I know I'm an engineer by training and have, former colleagues that remain in the consulting sector, and the challenges are not unique to state government. They're having the same challenges. The firm I worked at before taking this job, I'd spoken to someone there within the last few weeks, and they told me they had one position that's been open for almost 2 years at this point. So it's not unique to state government. But that is a very challenging space. And we have engineers that work dam safety, river management, drinking water, wastewater. So it's maybe 30 or 40 engineering professionals in the agency of a staff of 650, but they are in some pretty critical roles for what we're trying to do in terms of flood resilience, and then also what we're trying to do in terms of the core infrastructure work necessary to support housing.
Thank you.
Rep. Dickinson?
Yeah, thank you. I think you might have touched on what I was going to just ask. I was going to say, have you looked into contracting, going back to, your former consulting firm? I mean, it sounds like, is that something that would be an alternative in terms of instead of hiring a consultant, you contract out?
We do some of that. Certainly there are elements of the collective bargaining agreement that limit what we're able to do in that space. But we have also seen some fairly significant price increases associated with contracted support that then sort of cut into the number of projects we're able to do. So it's a delicate and ongoing balance we're working to strike.
Thank you. Thanks. So I put myself on the list and then Rep. Dickinson. You mentioned ARPA, and I've thought a lot about you over the last few years. When you joined, you weren't expecting COVID and all the funds that came through ARPA and then the floods.
Yeah.
We have been concerned over the few years about when we would get things from Douglas Farnham, DEC there was a whole lot that wasn't getting out the door. I know some things take time. It looks like that seems to be happening now. Tell us a little bit more about what's happening in the ARPA flood world. Yeah.
Sure. So ANR received just shy of $200 million worth of ARPA funds. We did a variety of projects, but the lion's share of that money went into different water infrastructure programs. So the Healthy Homes Initiative, where we worked on helping individual homeowners low-income homeowners replace failed wells and septic systems, provided grants to manufactured housing communities to improve their water infrastructure, made significant investments in eliminating combined sewer overflows, stormwater management, et cetera. So those are projects that are big and have a sort of a long lead time in kind of the engineering planning oftentimes. Every dollar we've received at this point is encumbered and dedicated to a project. And we are fully on track to have all of those projects built by the end of calendar year 26, which is the requirement. I think this is going to be a busy summer for many of those projects, but are feeling really good about where we stand in advancing all of that work.
So one of the things we were worried about early on was the staffing levels to do all this work. And have the staffing levels improved so that it's easier to do this work?
Yeah, so with the support of the General Assembly, we do have about 60 limited service positions that have been added to the agency to support this work. About 2/3 technical, 1/3 financial. And it's been a gift. It is the reason we've been able to do what we've been able to do. I think, we are keeping a careful eye on it at this point. When you create a 5-year limited service position, it sounds pretty good to particularly entry-level staff.
Year one, it's great.
Correct. In year 4, it gets a little less great. And we have seen some of the churn Steve's talking about, right? As permanent positions open up at the agency,
Yeah.
some of the best people we've hired into those limited service roles have transitioned into those permanent positions. Good for us in one regard.
Right.
Hard to refill, an 18-month limited service position in the other regard. And so I've started those conversations at the leadership level about how we can try to make sure we have the capacity we need to do the work to see us through the end of the ARPA program. Try to keep as many of these great staff who have joined us in these limited service positions as possible going forward, and balance all of those pieces. But I think, we really scaled up well. The business office staff positions continue to be a challenge. And so now we're sort of into that next phase of the work, which is the true implementation and making sure we can meet all our reporting and audit obligations in the back.
We were pretty worried about that whole staffing level, so I'm glad that's helped out.
Yeah, indeed.
Dr. Iacoboni?
Yes, I was not here during the last biennium, but my understanding, could be wrong, is that funds were appropriated so that you might be able to engage a consultant to look at the dam at the Green River Reservoir operated by Morrisville Water and Light. Could you just give a brief status on that and what your hope is?
So we have a contractor on board and doing an engineering evaluation. I think it's taking longer than we had expected, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One was our small but mighty dam safety team was deeply distracted, I guess I would say, during the summer of 23, responding to the flood events, and so didn't have this time to spend with the contractor. We also, sort of in parallel with engaging a contractor, we're negotiating a confidential business information agreement, I guess I would call it, with Morrisville Water and Light, so they could share some of the engineering work they had done previously to evaluate the condition of the dam and dike at Green River. Once we had access to the information, discovered it didn't contain everything we had thought it probably would. And so I've since amended the contract. Morrisville Water and Light has agreed to split the cost of that amendment with us. And the consultants are now kind of chugging away. I don't know, Steve, if you have a sense when the work should be done. I think it's later this year, and it may be close to the end of calendar 25 by the time we get a report.
Of course, I was on institutions and corrections last year, so that the list of dam work that was scheduled for last year, how did that come along?
I would have to get back to you on that. I know that again, it's been this struggle with, again, a set of flood events this summer, a small cadre of technical experts that first focused on ensuring the integrity of our dams following the flood event. But I know they continue to progress that work, and it's certainly not a reflection of the fact that there isn't real need. For reference, ANR owns 80 dams, including some very significant obligations around the Wrightsville, East Barry, and Waterbury facilities.
Great. Any other questions at the moment? Okay, I think you've got one more. We did a little sidetrack, but that was helpful. Thank you. Are we done? Was there one more?
No, oops, did I blow it?
That was it.
That was it. All right.
Yep, 2 departments, 3 appropriations.
Yeah, okay, that was what it was.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They were those.
I saw the 3 and I thought there were 3.
Correct. No, they're both, the second and third are both reflected on that slide.
Great. Wow. Well, anything else you'd like us to know while you're here? Put you on the spot.
Look forward to coming back once the governor's budget drops.
A few weeks after that. So that's great. All right.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. Committee, let me check with Erin about what's happening. Are we still next to 10:15?
Yes,
Okay, and then to be determined on some of the other.
and then the Cannabis Control Board is coming in at 11, and then Doug Arnum will be talking about ERAB at like.
Okay, so we will not have any afternoon session at this point, which means you can all work on your budgets and connect with people, which is great. So Erin's probably already updated the agenda online, but take a look at it so we know. So 10:15 is when we, so you have a little break. You can go get your picture taken. It's already done that.